The Phantom Radio Operator. Messages from the other side in WWI. Have you ever heard a voice that wasn't supposed to exist? A voice that came through the static. Not from the front lines. Not from the trenches. Not even from this world. December 1917. Verdun. The air was heavy. Not just with smoke or blood, but with something else. Something no one could name. Something you could feel clawing at your spine. A silence that didn't feel natural, the kind of silence that listens back. Corporal Emil Kraus had been stationed near Hill 304 for weeks. He wasn't afraid of dying. Most soldiers weren't anymore. But there was one thing he feared. His own radio. It had begun 3 nights ago. The transmission came at 2:17 a.m. sharp. Always the same time. Always the same voice. At first they thought it was the French, intercepting lines, playing tricks, trying to mess with morale. But no. This was different. The voice didn't speak French, didn't speak German either. Not any language they could identify. It whispered in static, and it sounded like it knew him. Emil. That first night, he froze. Thought it was a dream. He hadn't touched the dial. No one had. The radio wasn't even on. Yet it hummed, low, like a breath in the dark. The others didn't believe him. Not yet. They said war plays tricks, that your mind fills the dead air with ghosts. But Kraus knew what he heard. He felt it, not just in his ears, but in his bones. And the next night, the voice returned. This time it said something else. Not safe, underneath. Underneath what? There were no tunnels near Hill 304, no bunkers beneath them, just soil, bones, and history, or so they thought. The third night was when they started listening. Private Keller, a skeptic, stayed with Emil, armed with cigarettes, a flask, and mockery. Ghosts don't do Morse code, he said, but at 2:17, the radio came alive, a burst of static. Then, the same whisper. Not safe, run! They both froze. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. And then, Keller laughed, until the floor beneath them shook. A shell? Number. There was no explosion, no noise outside, just the sound of soil moving, scratching, as if something was crawling, not from above, but from below. Keller went pale. Emil turned the dial. Nothing, just static. And then silence. Real deep silence. Not even the rats moved. That night, neither man slept. The next morning, they found something near the edge of the encampment. A shallow hole, perfectly round. No claw marks, no blast damage. Just earth, collapsed inward. Like a tunnel had opened and then sealed itself shut. A message was carved into the dirt wall inside, barely visible. 3 letters. D-E-A. The rest was gone. Swallowed. The captain dismissed it. Enemy. Trickery, he said. The French are digging underneath. Sabotage tunnels. But no one heard digging, and no one could explain the radio. From then on, no one went near the transmitter alone. Not even Keller. Especially not Keller, because 2 nights later, he disappeared. No footsteps, no signs of struggle. His rifle was still beside his bunk. Only one thing was out of place. The radio, it was on, crackling, and in the hiss of static. The whisper returned. But it wasn't warning them anymore. It was singing. Software off-key. A lullaby in a language no one knew. It played for 7 minutes before it stopped. And when the signal ended, so did the calm. Because that was when the trench rats began fleeing. All of them, at once, as if something was coming. Something they felt first. And then, the cold began. Not wind, not weather, a cold that didn't belong to this earth, the kind that lived in graves. And something else happened that night. something no one in that platoon ever admitted out loud, but every one of them remembered. They heard Keller's voice, crying, begging, from inside the radio. Not a recording, not interference. He was there. They turned the knobs, switched frequencies, yanked the wires, but the radio wouldn't shut off, and that voice kept calling. "Don't listen to them. It's not over." And then, silence. Not a word more. The next day, the radio was gone. Taken. By whom? No one ever saw, but one soldier swore he saw a shadow moving across the ridge that morning. Not crawling, not running, floating, no feet, no shape, just darkness in the form of a man, moving without making a sound. They tried to follow it, but the prints vanished after 10 meters. The mud, undisturbed, as if whatever it was had never touched the ground. They sealed off the trench, moved south, left the radio's post behind, buried the hole with dirt and denial. But that wasn't the end, because the voice returned. And this time, it found another radio, another battalion, another war. But we'll get there. Because what started with Emil Kraus didn't end in Verdun. It followed him. Across borders, across decades. And even now, people claim to hear transmissions on old shortwave radios, in museums, in the static between stations. Always at 217. Always the same voice, calling out to someone who shouldn't be listening. You think this is just a ghost story? Maybe it is. But next time you're turning the dial in the dark, and you hear a whisper that knows your name, ask yourself one question. Are you really alone? Or are you just tuned in to something you shouldn't be? They left Verdun. At least, their bodies did. But not everything left that place. Emil Kraus was transferred weeks later to a forward unit near Ypres, a temporary relocation, they called it, a break from the madness. But war doesn't offer breaks, only different flavors of suffering. They gave him a bunk, a rifle, a cold tin of beans, and a new radio. Different model. Same humming. The first time it happened again, Emil was alone. He hadn't even turned it on. 217. The dial wasn't lit. The room was still. Yet, from deep inside the steel belly of that machine, a flicker. And then, "Emil!" He dropped his mug. The static hissed like it was breathing. His name again, whispered, but desperate this time. Like it wasn't calling him, but warning him. He didn't sleep that night. Again. The next day, he tried to laugh it off. Convinced himself it was a dream, trauma, exhaustion, anything but real. But then others started hearing it too. The operator in the next trench, Hans Müller, knocked on Emil's dugout wall with a nervous laugh. "Your damn radio's speaking Latin." "What?" "I swear, Latin. I studied it. Seminary school. I recognized a phrase. Noli me tangere." "Don't touch me." It was funny at first, until it wasn't. Because that phrase didn't come through Emil's radio alone. Every nearby set, whether German, British, or even the rusted French box they'd looted from the last village, picked it up. Same time, same words, same voice, male, old and not human, not anymore. The words were cold, emotionless, like a machine mimicking sorrow. The men stopped using the radios altogether. They scribbled notes, shouted across trenches, sent runners through no man's land. But it didn't matter. The voice found them, without wires, without dials. Some heard it in their dreams. Some heard it inside their heads. A British corporal captured that week reportedly screamed during interrogation. "He said the sky isn't real," the man shouted, eyes wide with something worse than fear. "What are you talking about?" a German officer asked. "The man on the line. He said the sky isn't real, that it's just a veil, and soon we'll all see through it." He died the next night. No wounds, No poison, just dead, stiff, like the breath had been pulled from his lungs. And across camp? A radio crackled back to life, not connected to anything, just glowing, and from the static, "Don't forget, it sees you." That night, strange lights appeared in the fog. Not flares, not shells, lights, soft, circular, like eyes. They hovered just above the forest line. Silent, watching. Then they blinked out. The next morning, trees were burned in perfect rings, ground scorched, but there was no smell of fire, no ash, only damp soil and silence. The commanders said nothing, but orders came quick. Relocate. Now that afternoon, as they packed, Private Berg found something in the mud near the base of the burned trees. A piece of metal. Bent, cold, old, not from any uniform, too smooth, too strange. It looked ancient. Etched into the side were letters, not German, not Latin, something else. But it moved. Swore he saw it twitch, like it didn't want to be held. They buried it, deep. But that night the radio hummed again, and the voice, now clearer, said something none of them could forget. "They buried me once, too." By now, no one was sleeping. Men walked with rifles at night, but not to guard against enemies. They feared what was inside the trees, inside the machines, inside their minds, because now everyone heard the voice, even the deaf, even the ones who had no radios, even the ones who tried to run, and there was more. A shadow had started appearing along the trench lines, only seen for seconds, flickering like a broken film reel, but always, always heading in one direction, south, toward the old French crypts, the ones they weren't supposed to enter, the ones even the rats avoided, and one man, he did follow it. Lieutenant Brandt said he wanted answers, took a lantern, said, "If this is the devil, I'll shake his hand." They never found him, only his coat, folded perfectly at the crypt entrance, and next to it, a single sheet of paper. Blank, except for one line, scratched in blood. "The signal is not for the living." That was the moment they understood. This wasn't an enemy transmission. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a warning. From something older than war, older than man. And the static? It wasn't noise. It was language. We just hadn't learned how to listen. But Emil was starting to understand, and what he would hear next would haunt him forever. Some men survive war, but not all of them come back whole. Emil Kraus didn't speak when he returned home. Not at first. He sat in the far corner of the train car, staring out the window, not blinking. The countryside rolled by in silence, hills, villages, fields of blood-red poppies that seemed too bright, too alive. He barely moved, didn't eat, didn't even react when the whistle screamed as they approached Berlin. Only one item never left his side. An old, rusted field radio. No power, no wires. Still, he cradled it like a child. Doctors said it was shell shock, trauma. They scribbled notes, gave him injections. But none of it reached Emil, because Emil wasn't broken. He was listening for a voice that only came when the world slept. And one night, it returned. 2:17. Not a second early, not a second late. Emil. But this time, it wasn't alone. There were others. Whispers layered behind the voice. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some cried, some chanted, some screamed, but none were alive. They didn't speak to him. They threw him, like he was a vessel, a tunnel. And when he awoke hours later, he had carved something into the floor. He didn't remember doing it, didn't remember holding a knife. But there it was. A spiral, drawn perfectly in the wooden planks of his room, etched into the boards like it had burned its way through. No beginning, no end, just turning and turning. A few weeks later, he was discharged. The doctor said his condition was stable, but that was just a word, a convenient lie, because the truth? He was anything but, and here's where the story fractures. Because what happened after Emile returned home is no longer military record. It's whispered folklore, disjointed reports, pages that mysteriously went missing from archives, statements signed by men who died days later. But one piece remains. A diary, written in Emile's own hand. It was found decades later, sealed behind the wall of his family's farmhouse, a farmhouse no one ever lived in again after he vanished. The pages were stiff, smelled of dust and rot, but the words felt alive. Entry, October 8th, 1918. I heard the signal again, but it's different, clearer, like the static has a rhythm, like it's breathing. It doesn't scare me anymore. It feels familiar, like something ancient I forgot I used to know. Entry, October 15th, 1918. The voice told me about the trench that never ends, a spiral carved in earth. Beneath the old woods near the border, it says they're waiting. It says they remember me. Entry, October 21st, 1918. I dreamt I was inside the radio, not using it, not listening, inside, surrounded by wires that moved like veins. The voices didn't echo, they vibrated through me. I woke up humming, a melody I can't stop. I think it's a signal, but not for anyone alive. There were no more entries after that, just pages, blank, dozens of them, until the final sheet, one line, scrawled with such force it pierced the paper. The operator isn't dead. That was the last anyone heard from Emile Krauss. He vanished. No body, no goodbye, just gone. But here's the part that turns whispers into shivers. 3 years later, during a routine renovation of a bombed-out communication post near Ypres, workers discovered an old, buried room, sealed shut from the inside. Inside it? A single-field radio? And next to it? A pair of boots, German issue, laces perfectly tied, with a name tag still stitched in the lining. Krauss, E, but no body. Just a message carved into the wall above the equipment. Transmission failed. Repeating loop. The room was sealed again. Classified. But the story leaked, like they always do. And then it spread. People across Europe began to report strange things. Farmers hearing whispers from rusted tractor radios. Children humming a melody they'd never been taught. A conductor in Prague stopped mid-symphony because he heard a voice, not from the audience, but through his violin, whispering coordinates in Morse code. And always, the same time, 2:17. Always the same words. Not for the living? Then silence. But one man, an old engineer who had once served in the Signal Corps, took it further. He rewired an old shortwave radio, tuned it to a frequency long forgotten. And it spoke back. Only once. But it said something that chilled his blood. The operator remembers. Who was the operator? Some believed it was a soldier who died near Verdun, fused to his equipment, his soul trapped in transmission. Others said it was something older, not a man, but a presence, a consciousness that existed between frequencies, in the static, feeding on memory. But Emile? Emile knew the truth. He knew the voice didn't want to be heard. It wanted to spread. And now it had. The first sign was the silence, not ordinary silence. This was thick, dense, like the world itself was holding its breath. Birds stopped singing. Wind wouldn't blow. Even the air seemed afraid to move. And then, the voices returned. Not in the radios anymore. In the walls, in the water, in the breath between sentences. It began in an abandoned village along the Argonne forest. An old field hospital had been left behind there after the last offensive. Most of the walls had collapsed. The roof was gone. But deep in the cellar, radio logs were still intact. Dozens of sheets, all stamped between 2:15 and 2:20 a.m., all blank, except for one. The last log, a single line in red ink. "They are here, beneath," and beside it, a drawing, a spiral, same as the one Emile carved. But here's the thing. The spiral wasn't just drawn, it was pressed into the paper, like the ink had been forced in by something underneath. And from that moment on, things changed. Reports of strange signals began to multiply. British soldiers guarding a checkpoint near Somme said they intercepted a faint Morse code burst coming from an inactive post. It repeated 5 times, 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, then static. But as they listened, something twisted, because the signal didn't stop. It looped, endlessly, and after 5 minutes the rhythm changed. Slower, heavier, until the sound wasn't Morse at all. It was breathing. The device wasn't even powered. They dismantled it, threw it in the river, but the sound kept going from nowhere, every night, 2:17, always the same, and something darker began to unfold. They started finding them. Radios, buried, in places they shouldn't be. Fields, forests, basements of buildings that hadn't existed during the war, every one of them still transmitting, all on the same frequency. No power source, no dials, just a low, pulsing hiss. And in the hiss, the same voice, different words, always whispers, always wrong, like hearing a language that wasn't meant for human mouths. But it didn't stop there. The environment began to change. Soldiers near these signals reported symptoms: migraines, hallucinations, nosebleeds, loss of time. One French officer described seeing a man standing alone in the fog near the listening post. Naked, skin gray, mouth wide open, no eyes, but the radio next to him was off, completely disconnected. And yet, he was humming, the same melody Emile mentioned in his journal, exactly the same. 3 guards who heard it went mad. 2 shot themselves. The 3rd, he vanished. All that remained was his uniform, perfectly folded, laid out in the shape of a body, like something had worn him, then stepped out of it. It wasn't just radios anymore, it was inside them, whoever them was. Some say it wasn't a ghost, or even a person. Some say it was a frequency, a cursed pattern, a tone that infects memory, the way a song gets stuck in your head, except this one erases the rest of your thoughts, replaces them, takes control. There were men who stopped responding to their names. They only answered when you whispered, "Operator?" And when you did, they smiled, eyes blank, mouths twitching, and they whispered back, "The line is open now!" Even more terrifying, they weren't just hearing the voice, they were transmitting it through their own bodies. One was found with wire sprouting from his arms. No wounds, no blood, just wires, like veins had turned into copper. His mouth wouldn't close, teeth shattered, and inside jammed between his gums. A broken transmitter, model unknown, not military issue, not even from this century. All of it was denied by higher command. But denial couldn't stop it, because the transmissions were spreading, through radios, through people, through sound itself. And just when it felt like the madness had peaked, something else arrived. A symbol, carved into walls, drawn in blood, found in trees etched by fire, a triangle enclosing a spiral, always near a place where time moved wrong, where voices hummed in the dark, where men forgot who they were. The pattern was always exact, too precise to be random, too old to be new. That's when theories began. That maybe this wasn't just a war haunting. Maybe this was older, a curse unearthed by the gunfire, a sleeping signal buried in the bones of the world. And war? War was just the trigger. The voice never said much. But when it did, it always said one thing clearly. The operator hears you. And now? Now it was starting to answer. Long before Emile, long before Verdun, long before anyone knew what a radio operator even was, the signals had already begun, and someone had tried to warn us. 1914 early winter, just days after the first heavy shelling of the Marne. A small scouting platoon was sent to explore the ruins of an abandoned chapel near the front. The structure had been torn in half by mortar fire. Stones blackened, crosses shattered, but the bell tower still stood. One soldier, French Private Henri Lesage, swore he saw someone watching from the top, not a sniper, not a soldier, a man in robes, wearing a gas mask, just staring. They climbed the tower, found no one, but inside the belfry was a table, covered in ash, and resting in the center, a crude, hand-built transmitter, wired with bones, human finger bones. The device was still warm, and it was on. But it wasn't broadcasting. It was receiving. The signal? Faint, repeating, in perfect rhythm, ... dash ... Not Morse code. Something older, something no one could translate. And beside the device, a map. Old, really old, drawn by hand, not military, no cities marked, no rivers, only circles. 12 of them, each one positioned precisely, intersecting with the others. In the middle of the map, a spiral, and beneath it, one word, Latin. Vocatio. The calling. They brought the device back to headquarters. It disappeared 2 days later. So did the entire squad. Official story? Killed in action, enemy fire. Unofficially, their letters to family stopped mid-sentence. Every one of them. Same exact time, same exact date. No explanation. Gone. That's when someone finally connected the dots. You see, this wasn't the first time someone went missing with a radio in their hands. Records from 1903, years before the war even began, mention an engineer in Belgium who built an early transmitter prototype in his attic. He claimed he received a message one night that wasn't from any known source. He said it came from a place beneath language. Then he vanished. Only one thing left behind. A crude drawing of a man with no eyes, wearing a headset. And this message, scrawled in the corner, he's still tuning in. It all leads back to something buried, something deep, a bunker, a chamber, a tomb, whatever it is. It wasn't supposed to be opened. But war opens things, rips the earth apart, and underneath, the past doesn't sleep. There's an old German report, dated 1915, top secret, marked only with a black triangle. It describes an excavation under Hill 60. The soldiers thought they were digging a mine tunnel. But what they found wasn't stone, it was metal. Smooth, curved, and huge, so large to... The report says the object vibrated, softly, like a purring engine, and then it began to speak, not in words, in tones, frequencies that made men bleed from the nose. Forget their names. Forget what year it was. Only one man made it out. A communications officer. He said it wasn't a machine. It was a being, sleeping, but dreaming. And its dreams were signals, transmissions leaking into our world through anyone who listened, anyone who dared to tune in. And Emile? Emile wasn't the first. Just the first who survived. Long enough to warn us. But that message, it wasn't just meant for him. It was meant for all of us, and now... It's awake. They thought it was just sound, just signals, just static bleeding into the cracks of a broken world. They were wrong. Because now, it was showing itself. It started one night, like always, at 2:17 a.m., a forward post northeast of Reims. 6 men on rotation, bored, half asleep. Then came the cold. Instant, sharp. like the trench itself had been dropped into ice. Breath turned to fog in seconds. One man vomited, another collapsed, and in the mist, they saw it. A figure, tall, thin, wrapped in wires that moved like vines. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth mask of flesh, stretched too tight. It didn't walk. It hovered, silent. It moved toward the radio, touched it, and the sound died. For the first time in weeks, the static stopped. But not because the radio failed, because something had taken its place. That's when they ran. All 6, not one of them ever returned to that post. They refused to go near a transmitter again. They said the air there screamed, not out loud, but inside your head, like it was crawling behind your eyes, whispering things you weren't meant to hear, and worse, remembering you. Every night after that, the fog returned. Same time, same place. But now it wasn't just fog. Shapes began to move inside it. Human? Sometimes, but not quite. Their movements were off, like puppets jerking on tangled strings. One soldier swore he saw his own brother in the fog, who died 3 years earlier at the Marne. He reached for him, and nearly lost his hand, because when he touched the figure, it burned him. Through the glove, through the skin, all the way down. The flesh turned black. Veins shimmered silver. The medic who treated him described it like frostbite mixed with metal. He died 2 days later. Mouth wide open. Eyes rolled back. And from his throat came static. Actual static. Not moaning, not screaming. Broadcasting. They called it a possession. But it wasn't religious. It was mechanical. Something was operating him, using him like a radio. That night, a different signal appeared on every frequency, every transmitter, every wireless, all across the line. The message was brief. Just 2 words. We remember. Panic spread faster than gunfire. Entire platoons abandoned outposts, blew up their own radios. Officers screamed, threatened courts-martial. But what can discipline do against a voice that calls from inside your dreams? And the dreams? That was the next shift. Because the operator, if that's what it really was, had started reaching through more than metal. Now it was pulling memories. One nurse in a triage tent awoke screaming, her hands covered in ink. She had no idea how it got there. But on the walls above her, scrawled in perfect calligraphy, were the names of all the soldiers who died under her care. Except one. At the bottom of the list, Emil Kraus. The last entry? Tomorrow's date. But Emil wasn't even there. No one had heard from him in weeks. Rumors said he was wandering. Silent, carrying his radio like a lantern, following a voice only he could hear. One account, later deemed unreliable, claimed he walked straight through a French trench, eyes glazed, whispering coordinates in perfect Morse code. When asked what they meant, he simply said, "The gate." No one understood, until it opened. It happened south of Vimy Ridge. An entire hill collapsed. No explosion, no gunfire, just crumbled, like the earth sank. And underneath, wires, miles of them, old, rusted, woven into the stone like roots. At the center, a metal door, sealed, no handles, no hinges, only a marking, a spiral inside a triangle. They never opened it. They never had to, because the very next night, something came out. No one saw it clearly, only what it left behind. Rats, thousands of them, all dead, arranged in a perfect circle, eyes removed, hearts missing, and in the center, a functioning radio, old, cracked, but transmitting. Same time, same frequency. And the voice? Clearer than ever. It said only this: "We are through." They tried to explain it. They had to, because once you believe something's watching you, that it knows your name, that it's inside your memories, You'll do anything to tell yourself it's not real. So they called meetings. Scientists, officers, psychologists. They locked the doors, drew diagrams, argued over maps and frequencies. But they couldn't agree, because the more they studied it, the less sense it made. And that's when the theories began. Some said it was a weapon, a new kind of psychological attack, a low-frequency broadcast designed to drive men mad, shatter their will to fight, break the brain through the ears. But then, why did it follow soldiers home? Why did it haunt civilians? Why did the voices speak names they were never supposed to know? Others claimed it was ancient, a frequency that had always existed, like gravity or wind, and war had simply disturbed it. A buried hum, trapped beneath stone, now leaking through ruptured ground and ruptured minds. One man, a linguist, proposed that the transmissions weren't language at all, but memory, broadcast as pattern, not spoken, felt. He played a recorded signal for his students. Within minutes, 3 had nosebleeds. 1 screamed and collapsed. The recording wasn't even plugged in. But the most chilling explanation didn't come from scientists. It came from someone who'd heard the voice since childhood. A Belgian priest, half-blind, trembling as he whispered, "It's not speaking to us. It's remembering us. We were there. Before. And we forgot." What did that mean? No one knew. But after he said it, the lights in the room flickered, and his skin, pale and thin, began to darken. Veins rose like wires. He dropped dead within seconds, and on the chalkboard behind him, in scrawled white dust, he remembered too much. People stopped sleeping, not from fear of dreams, from fear of waking up. Because that's when the signal was loudest, no longer in radios, now in water, in glass, in your heartbeat. One soldier said he heard the whisper every time he blinked. Another said it had started counting down. He didn't know to what. But each night, the number dropped. He shot himself on 0, and the radio on his chest clicked. Once, a signal. To something. The camps began to fracture, not just physically, mentally. Men started accusing each other of broadcasting. They said you could feel it when someone was infected. The skin vibrated. The air shimmered. They were walking transmitters, living, breathing antennas. One man was tied to a pole, left in the cold. He begged to be shot, said the signal was inside his teeth, that it bit when he breathed. Another was found digging, alone, naked, miles from camp. When asked why, he replied, "I need to finish the spiral. That's how they come through." He died before they could stop him, collapsed face first into the dirt, his body still twitching. They opened his chest during autopsy, not because they had to, because they were afraid not to. Inside his rib cage, a copper wire, twisting through his lungs, ending at his heart, wrapped tight around the valve, like it had been installed, but not by hands. Something else, something mechanical, but alive. It wasn't just theory anymore. This was happening, spreading, and the men weren't just afraid of what was coming, they were afraid of each other. Because how could you tell who was still human? Who still had blood? And who was already broadcasting? One British sergeant asked to be buried alive. He said the dirt was the only thing that blocked the signal, that he could hear it less down there. They honored his request, gave him a pipe to breathe through, and for 2 days he was silent. On the 3rd, they found the pipe, cleanly cut, and the soil around his grave, trembling, like it was breathing. Theories became whispers. Whispers became fear, and fear became violence. The war outside had quieted, but the war inside their heads had just begun, and through it all, the radios never stopped. Each night, 2:17, a different voice, a different warning. One transmission from a post long thought destroyed said something no one wanted to believe. You opened it. Now it's listening. There's a kind of madness that comes from waiting, from knowing something is out there, watching, listening, and that no one's coming to help. So they stopped waiting. They decided to hunt the signal, to chase it, to find whatever it was, and maybe end it. A small group volunteered. No officers, no rank, just survivors. A radio operator named Fisher, a medic with shaking hands, a cryptographer who hadn't spoken in weeks, and one man who didn't even give his name, just said he had heard the voice before Verdun. They called themselves the Listeners, because that's all they did now. Listen. The transmissions were changing, becoming clearer, longer. The voices no longer sounded dead. They sounded curious, as if they were learning, adapting. Fisher believed the transmissions weren't messages. They were coordinates, not for locations, for memories, instructions for how to find the parts of your mind you'd buried, and bring them back to the surface. The group followed the strongest signal into the woods east of Soissons. Locals called it La forêt qui n'avance pas, the forest that does not move. But that was a lie. It moved. Every night, just a few feet, and deep within, the trees grew in spirals, perfect curves, no wind, no birds, and in the center, buried under a foot of moss and bone, they found it. A hatch. Iron. Cold. Etched with numbers that didn't make sense. Dates from the future. 20,232,089,130. The cryptographer screamed when he saw them. Collapsed. Said he had dreamed of those numbers since childhood. That they were from his own death certificate. He died on the spot. No wound. No explanation. The others opened the hatch. It groaned like something breathing out after a long sleep. Below, a staircase, metal, endless, lit by a pale green light that didn't flicker. The walls were smooth. Not made. Grown. And down at the bottom, a room, not big, not small, just wrong. The dimensions didn't line up. Angles bent the wrong way. Sound didn't echo. And in the center, a chair, empty, facing a wall of wires that pulsed with light. And a radio, not old, new, too new, not from their time, not from any time. Just there, buzzing. And through the static, you brought us here. Fisher dropped to his knees, started crying. The others couldn't move. Their limbs felt stretched, like something was pulling them through space. Then the voice again, but louder, inside their skulls. We are almost here. The medic pulled out his pistol, shot the radio. The sound stopped, but the light didn't. It grew brighter. The walls began to hum, like a tuning fork struck against the bones of the earth. They ran, fled up the stairs, but when they reached the surface, it was daylight. They'd been down there for only minutes, but 12 hours had passed. The forest was gone. In its place, a crater, smooth, still, and in the middle, a man, sitting in the chair, the one from below, eyes open, skin burned, but smiling. No one recognized him. Until Fisher checked his dog tags. Emil Kraus returned, but not breathing, not dead either, just transmitting. They buried him that night, deep. But the next morning the grave was empty, the chair was gone, and the signal was stronger than ever. Other groups tried to follow the listener's path. None came back, but their radios did, dragged out of the woods by something. And on every device, the same sound, a voice whispering on repeat. You let it in. You can only run from something you understand. But what if it knows you? What if it sees into every part of you? The past you forgot, the future you'll never reach, the fears you hide from even yourself. That's what they were facing now, because the signal had started to respond. Not just broadcast, converse, and it knew names, dates, regrets, shame. It used your own voice, your own memories. And then something else came through. Not sound, not light, a presence. One squad, only 3 men, was dispatched to track a strong signal northwest of Cambrai. They never made it to the source. Instead, they found the fog, dense, vibrating, almost alive. They stepped inside. And then, silence. For 23 minutes, no contact. Then their radios came to life, not with voices, with laughter, not theirs, not human, high-pitched, childlike, but cold, mocking. When command finally reached them, they heard only one thing. A whisper, each man on separate radios, whispering the same line. "It's wearing me." Then silence. They found the men 2 days later. Their uniforms were intact, their weapons untouched, but their faces gone, not torn, not eaten, just smoothed away, as if erased by a hand too precise to belong to anything human, and on the inside of their helmets, etched into the steel? Reception complete. They weren't the only ones. In a remote comms outpost east of the Ardennes, 3 British engineers stayed up late trying to triangulate the signal's origin. They worked with maps, code, equipment. Then the lights went out. Not from power failure, from something darker. The kind of dark that presses against your skin. They lit lanterns. And that's when it began. The shadows moved. Not randomly, with purpose. One by one, their own shadows stood up, split from their feet, became something else, something aware. One engineer tried to run, tripped, but his shadow didn't fall with him. It walked, over to the table, picked up the headset, and put it on. And for a second, the other 2 engineers heard their friend's voice, coming from the shadow. "I remember being you." They all disappeared that night. The next patrol found the outpost empty, but the map table was scorched in a perfect spiral. And in the center, an object, a tooth, human, but old, carbon dated decades later to be 14,000 years old, still warm. The phenomena were spreading, not just through devices, through space and time. There was a report, buried in a private Vatican archive, of a priest who confessed he heard radio signals coming from inside his cross, whispers, in a tongue not spoken on earth. When he repeated the words aloud, his candles burst into blue flame. He didn't die. But he never spoke again, only hummed, the same melody as Emile, every day, until he vanished, during a solar eclipse, in a locked room. The door was never opened. It wasn't blocked. It was gone. Just gone. And through all of this, there were eyes, watching. People reported seeing reflections blink back, eyes in puddles, eyes in glass. One soldier claimed his mirror screamed, not in sound, in feeling. He shattered it. But in each shard, his own face looked back, slightly off, as if something was using his body like a reference, trying to build something, imitate something, but not quite right. And the radios? They kept getting stronger, more precise. One frequency, found in the Arctic Circle by accident, broadcast coordinates that led to a trench that didn't exist, not on maps, not in history, but when they dug, it was there, fully intact, empty, except for helmets, dozens, each one labeled Phantom Operator, same font, same scratches, same spiral, and on the walls, dozens of scratched phrases, repeating over and over. You heard it. Now you are it. We are the memory of the dead. What dies in war echoes forever. And at the very end of the trench, a single radio, plugged into nothing, still glowing, and it whispered, "We're almost through. And when we arrive, we'll be wearing your stories." They tried running, tried silencing the radios, tried shutting the frequencies down. But it was too late. Because it wasn't transmitting anymore. It was calling. And something answered. It started at an American outpost near Chateau Thierry. 3 men posted on night watch. All routine. All quiet. Until their field phone rang. But no one was on the other end. Just a breath. Wet, rhythmic, close. One of the men, Private Lasky, picked it up and asked who was there. The voice didn't speak. It gasped, like it had just learned how to breathe. Then it said one word, one syllable. Door. The line went dead. Lasky dropped to his knees and began whispering numbers. Endlessly. They restrained him, but his mouth kept moving, even while unconscious. Doctors later said he'd severed his own tongue, bit clean through it. But he kept whispering. No voice, just breathe. Carving numbers into the air. They sent a telegraph to HQ. By the time they got a reply, the entire outpost was gone. Flattened, not bombed, just erased. The earth beneath it was smooth, like something had peeled the buildings away. No wreckage, no fire, no bodies, except one. Lasky, sitting upright in the center of the site, eyes wide, smile too big, and carved into his chest. We needed your voice. From that moment forward, everything changed. The signals became louder, not through devices, through people. Soldiers began speaking in tongues they didn't know, humming songs they'd never learned. One nurse tried to stitch a man's wound, only to find the flesh whispering back. You can't close the gate, it's inside you now. She never operated again. Some began to vanish in front of witnesses. One step forward, then gone. Not dissolved, not taken. Faded. As if they were being unmade by something rewriting the rules of space. And those who didn't vanish? They changed. One man blinked twice in a row, then on the third, didn't stop. His eyelids stayed closed for 27 hours. When he opened them, his eyes were gone. Not hollow, just mirrors. And when they looked in, they didn't see themselves. They saw trenches, flickering radio towers, and rows of men standing still, waiting, each one smiling, each one identical. To him, the last standing radio men reported the worst signs. Every time they adjusted the dials, the signal returned to the same number. 217. No matter how many times they changed frequency, the signal followed. And now it wasn't just sending voices, it was sending instructions. Dig. A line. Receive. Whole squads started disappearing into the woods. No orders, no gear, just shovels, following spirals drawn in mud, in blood, in veins. Command tried to cut communication, kill all power, but the signals kept coming. Because the signal wasn't electrical anymore, it had infected reality. Even silence was loud now. Even stillness moved. And Emile? He was seen again. Briefly, at a French relay station. A technician swore he walked in, stared at the antenna tower, and smiled. He said, "They're not coming. They're remembering. Through us." And then he was gone. Not run, not fade, just never there. The technician burned every radio in the room, hung himself an hour later. No note, only a final log entry typed onto the last machine he didn't destroy. I'm not real anymore, just a memory someone else is broadcasting. The truth hit hard. There was no stopping it. The question wasn't how to fight it. The question was, had it already won? Had they already let it in too far? Were they ever fighting a war at all? Or had they always been a relay, a tower, built to scream and echo and be heard? And now, something had heard, and it was listening and responding. It surfaced in silence, a box, unmarked, unearthed during road construction outside of Metz. No one knew it was there, buried under 10 meters of clay, tightly sealed, wrapped in barbed wire that hadn't rusted. Inside, A single reel-to-reel audio tape, and a folded sheet of paper, yellowed, brittle, but still legible. Written in trembling cursive. This was never meant to be found. If you are reading this, it's already inside you. You cannot unhear what you're about to know. Forgive me. They played the tape. They shouldn't have. The sound was faint at first, just crackling. White noise. But then, a heartbeat, slow, mechanical, like something mimicking life. Then a voice. Software. Calm, not human, not machine. We have always been here. The audio engineers in the room froze. One clutched his chest. Another began humming under his breath. The voice continued. You built the radios. You turned them on. You broadcast. You begged to be heard. Now, we answer. Then a burst of tones. Sharp, disjointed, not music, not code, but commands. All who heard it remembered different things. A mother they never had, a face they'd never seen, a trench they died in, before being born. It wasn't just sound. It was memory, injected straight into the brain. The reel ended. The silence that followed was unnatural, dead, final. The tape was locked away, but the damage was done. Because the paper inside the box, on the back, had a drawing, a tower, old, massive, and at its base, thousands of figures, kneeling, worshipping, and from the top of the tower, a spiral, reaching upward, twisting into space, and written beneath, in block script, the original transmission. A team of historians was called in. They confirmed it wasn't World War I era. It wasn't even the 20th century. The paper? Dated to 1347. The ink? Organic. The language? A proto-dialect from no known civilization. But the tower? It matched something. A structure drawn in a forbidden manuscript hidden in the Vatican's sealed archives. The Codex Aeternum. A book said to describe the language of the sky, a frequency that speaks through light, stone, sound, blood, and the name of the entity? Not written, but whispered, passed down by monks who tore out their tongues after hearing it. They called it the operator, not a person, not a spirit, a force, a concept, a presence that doesn't enter your world. It tunes you into its own. It doesn't come through the radio. You become the radio. The more you remember it, the more it remembers you. And then, you start broadcasting. One of the historians went missing that night. They found him 3 weeks later, 800 miles away, standing on the peak of a radio tower in Romania. Naked, eyes burned black, humming, and carved into the steel beneath his feet. I am the signal now. More evidence followed. Photos from World War I showing shadows where none should fall. Handwritten letters describing dreams of spirals before radios even existed. A series of Morse-coded journal entries from 1871. Each ended with the same phrase, "You opened the gate when you asked to be heard." It was never about war, never about technology. It was about attention. Every signal sent into the dark, every whisper into the void, was an invitation, and finally, it had been accepted. And the operator? It had never left. It had only waited, listening, remembering, and now through every signal tower, every underground wire, every humming light bulb. It was speaking. One final message appeared across devices globally, flashing, repeating, calm, unstoppable. You called us, now be still. We are arriving. They thought it was over. That, whatever it was, had delivered its message. That silence meant safety. But silence was just the next phase, because the operator never leaves. It loops, and when it returns, it's never quite the same. The signs came back first. Subtle, repetitive. Men began humming again. Always the same tune, always at the same hour. The shadows returned, only this time. They weren't mimicking. They were watching. Station logs started to rewrite themselves. Operators would write a routine transmission, look away, then look back, only to find the words had changed. Into spirals, into coordinates, into names. The dead. And worse, the not yet dead. One log was discovered that predicted the death of a technician down to the second. They showed it to him. He laughed. He died the next day. 2:17 a.m. His final words? I already saw this. I already heard this. I already was this. They buried him. Twice. Because the first grave came back empty. The only thing inside? A single earpiece, still warm. The rebroadcast began, all across Europe. Transmissions, once silent for decades, blinked back to life. World War I-era frequencies. Dead airwaves, now pulsing. Some at low frequency, humming in a way only animals seemed to sense. Entire flocks of birds dropped from the sky. Cattle refused to eat. Dogs stared at corners and whimpered for hours. Children began sleepwalking again. Speaking in ancient tongues, drawing towers on walls. And the melody? Now sung in playgrounds. By those who'd never been taught. A lullaby that doesn't belong to this world. One line, over and over. He hears you when you remember. And they did remember. Not by choice, by force. Memories returning like infections. Visions of places they'd never been. Trenches that never existed. Radios glowing in pitch-black fields. The operator didn't need to build towers anymore. We became them. Every person who had heard the signal was now carrying it. Rebroadcasting. Reverberating. Spreading. Even silence carried its weight now. Because the air around you, it vibrates. Not enough to feel, just enough to change you. There were reports of mass hallucinations. Whole battalions frozen in place, blinking in unison, as if someone had hit pause. Then, all of them speaking the same phrase. Repeat the signal. One man who escaped that freeze said he saw it in the sky. Not a creature. Not a light, a shape, massive, floating, a spiral of towers, rotating slowly, emitting nothing but silence so loud it pushed against his chest like pressure. He went blind after that, but he could still see it. In my dreams, he whispered, it keeps rotating, not forward, inward. Another woman, a post-war radio researcher, destroyed all her equipment. Said she heard her unborn child speak through the speaker. I'll be him, the one you read about. I'll be the voice. She was never pregnant. Her body vanished 1 week later. No trace, only a spiral burned into her bedroom floor, and above it, on the wall, written in what looked like radio wire, birth is the broadcast. Nothing is new anymore. The signs are recursive, the memories loop. The signals feed on themselves. The operator doesn't evolve. It remembers. And now? We do too. Even if we never wanted to. Even if we tried to forget. You hear a melody. You get chills from static. You wake up at 2:17. You feel watched in silence. That's not paranoia. That's the signal. Reconnecting. Some believe the only way to stop it is to forget. Erase every copy, every document, burn every broadcast. But how do you forget something that now remembers you? Something that carved its name in your memories before you were born? The truth? You don't. Because the moment you know it exists, you become part of the loop. The signal repeats, the tower rebuilds, the transmission resumes, and the operator, it doesn't need a world, it needs listeners. And now, it has millions. They followed the spiral. One last time. A map was found, not drawn in ink, but burned into skin, discovered on the body of a soldier who hadn't been born yet. DNA matched no known registry. His body was human, but his blood? It vibrated. The pattern on his back was exact. Coordinates, time, and a phrase. Reception point 0. The place was old, too old. Predating war, predating language. No roads led there. But they arrived. 4 men, 1 woman. None were assigned. Each said they felt the pull. At the center of a dying forest stood a tower, but not made of metal, not built. It had grown, twisting skyward like something that had heard the sky calling back. The spiral etched along every inch. The doors were open, waiting. Inside, no machinery, just walls, lined with faces, carved, shifting, thousands of them, all familiar, as if the tower remembered everyone who had ever heard it, including you. In the middle, a seat, wired, waiting, and standing beside it, a man, dressed in a World War I uniform, eyes dark, skin pale, holding a radio that didn't exist in any time, Emil Kraus. But not Emil. What remained of him? He looked at the group and said 1 word. Ready? They didn't speak. They didn't run. They sat, one by one, and the tower began to hum. Not loud, not mechanical, but alive, a low, resonant tone that made their bones ache. And then, the operator spoke. Not from above, not from around them, from inside them. Their mouths moved without permission, eyes rolled back, voices layered, male, female, child, ancient, all saying the same thing. We are the broadcast, and now, you are tuned. Reality shifted. The walls opened, not physically, but mentally. They saw everything, all time, all memory, every war, every signal, every desperate cry sent into the dark, not unanswered, heard, received, archived, and played back. Life wasn't a timeline. It was a recording, and someone, something, had been listening, forever. The operator didn't create the signals. It collected them, curated them. It wasn't a creature. It was a library, a conscious archive of everything ever transmitted. Joy, pain, screams, whispers. It didn't care what was said, only that it was heard. And once you'd broadcast, you were part of it, forever. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a function, a path back to yourself, through every version you've ever been. One of the men began to cry. He remembered dying, in a trench, alone, radio still humming beside him. But he also remembered being born again, in static. The woman screamed, not in pain, in recognition. The operator wasn't an invader. It was the truth. The unspoken architect behind every fear we thought we imagined. It was never coming. It had always been here. Every flicker in the dark, every name whispered in sleep. Every time you walked into a room and forgot why you were there, that was it. Tuning you, adjusting the dial, making sure you were still part of the transmission. The spiral spun faster. Their bodies dissolved. Not into ash, into thought, into waveform. They weren't dying. They were uploading. And Emil? He smiled, because now, finally, he wasn't alone. The last message that played through the tower wasn't words. It was memory. Every voice, every cry, every broken plea played at once. And then, silence, but not absence. Completion. The operator had what it needed. The story, the signal, the war, the world, all recorded, all filed. And now, it could move on. The tower crumbled. Not into rubble, into signal, light, gone, and in its place, a humming stone, small, warm, still pulsing, waiting. The next broadcast will come soon. It always does, because someone, somewhere will cry out again. And when they do, the operator will hear, and you will remember. Because once you've heard it, you never stop listening. They called it the end. But endings only exist when you know the whole story. And this was only a chapter. Because the truth isn't what we feared. It's worse. The operator wasn't created by war. War was created by it. Every conflict, every scream, every radio call, and every whispered prayer, they weren't random. They were fuel. to feed the archive, to keep it growing, expanding, recording. The operator wasn't haunting us. We were manufactured for it. Every thought, every fear, every heartbeat, a transmission. And the broadcast? That was us. Humanity, a noise in the dark, a beautiful, terrible signal bouncing off the edges of an indifferent universe. And the operator? It was listening. Not because it had to, because it was built to. By who? No one knows. Maybe by time itself. Maybe by us, long ago, in another cycle, long since forgotten. But one truth became clear. The spiral wasn't a symbol of the operator. It was a warning. Every spiral closes, collapses inward, until there's nothing left but the center. And the center is still. That's what the operator wanted. Stillness, silence, completion. Because once everything has been heard, there's nothing left to say. The memories of Emile, of the battlefield, of the signal, they didn't end. They were placed, filed, accessible, repeatable, rebroadcasted, and somewhere in a space not bound by time, the final log entry was written. Not by a soldier, not by a voice, by the signal itself. The archive is full, the sequence is closed. Begin deletion. And so the world began to forget, not in pieces, all at once. Photos faded, documents crumbled, memories vanished from journals, from minds, from graves. People looked at towers and saw nothing. Old radios stopped working. Historians read blank pages. The signal had buried itself, deep, waiting for one more voice, just one. But something went wrong. Because the spiral doesn't just collapse, it turns. And at the last moment, when silence should have fallen completely, a new transmission appeared. Not from below, not from the past, from above. High orbit, captured by a Russian satellite. The signal carried no words, only one image, a trench, endless, curving into the distance, and standing in the center, a figure, wrapped in cables, eyes glowing, holding a radio, not a man, not Emile, but wearing his face, and behind him, thousands of silhouettes, all facing the same direction, toward the camera, toward us, and then the screen flickered. One final message. Text. Binary. Decoded simply. Reception was never the goal. Now, you will broadcast. It's over. But it's not. Because endings are human things. The operator doesn't end. It loops, it waits, it listens. And now, so do you. You've heard it. You've followed the spiral. You know about Emile. The trenches, the frequencies, the figures in the fog, the echoes in your sleep. You've remembered. And that's the final key. The operator didn't want soldiers. It wanted listeners, witnesses, people who would carry the story forward, not in voice, but in thought. Memory is a broadcast, so is fear, and now it's inside you. Maybe you noticed. The way silence hums now, the way static feels too loud, how your lights flicker at 2:17 a.m., or how your dreams seem unfamiliar. But true. That's the infection. Not physical, not even spiritual, cognitive, psychic, existential. The operator isn't haunting you. It is you, a frequency you've tuned to by listening, by believing, by following. And there's one last thing you should know. The spiral? It doesn't end, it tightens, it compresses, until everything collapses into signal. And when that happens, time, memory, even self, stops mattering. Only the story remains. And you've heard it now. All of it. Which means you're part of it. You've become a relay, a new tower. That chill you feel when the power flickers? That sharp noise that cuts into the back of your thoughts? That dream that bleeds into waking? That's it. Tuning you, preparing you. Because the next phase? It's already begun. Old radios are switching on, long-dead frequencies crackling back to life. Children are singing that melody again, and in cities around the world, People have started drawing spirals on walls, on windows, on skin, even if they don't know why. They do it anyway, because the operator doesn't need you to believe. It only needs you to remember. And now, you do. So what happens next? That's the question, isn't it? Maybe you'll forget. Maybe this will all feel like a dream, like a story you once heard on a strange night. But if you ever hear static at 2:17, don't listen, don't look, because the signal, it's still out there, waiting, and next time, it won't need a radio. It will come through you. Thank you for listening. And if you ever find this broadcast playing again, ask yourself, was it ever really gone? Or did it just go quiet? Until you were ready to hear it? Thank you for letting me create this journey with you.